I think the United States has a lot more to lose from what's going on right now than Russia, because the ruble is just another currency. The ruble isn't the world's reserve currency. The dollar is. We have a lot to lose. Russia doesn't have much to lose. I mean, sure, Putin could lose some credibility. The political or geopolitical risk as far as bonds being a safe haven is the greater threat of inflation, from which there is no safety in bonds at all. That's why bonds are down and gold is up on the week, because what investors really need a safe haven from is inflation, not geopolitical uncertainty. And by the way, Bitcoin didn't go up on the week either. Bitcoin was a little lower because Bitcoin is also not a hedge against inflation. But I want to talk a little bit more about this dollar rally, because I really think this may be the dollar's last hurrah, the swan song for the dollar. Because what's really going on right now geopolitically is we are reminding much of the world why it needs to move off the US dollar standard, especially some of these larger economies that are regarded as our enemies, like China, and some of China's friends, like India, and now, of course, Russia. And I think the Arab world is also taking a hard look at what's going on right now and considering their tenuous relationship with the United States. And I think a lot of people are waking up to the reality of the dangers that this dollar reserve system portends for the rest of the world, in addition to the cost of maintaining the dollar status, because the U.S. economy has so weakened industrially as a result of its reliance on this crutch, the ability to consume without producing, the ability to run enormous deficits, the fact that Americans don't have to save, that we could just go out and buy whatever we want and rely on the rest of the world to fund our profligacy. This is exacting a heavy cost on the rest of the world. But not only does the world have to bear the burden of this cost, but now they have to accept the risk of this status being used against them, as is fully evident from what's happening right now with Russia and the sanctions. So as I've been saying from the beginning, I think the United States has a lot more to lose from what's going on right now than Russia, because the ruble is just another currency. The ruble isn't the world's reserve currency. The dollar is. We have a lot to lose. Russia doesn't have much to lose. I mean, sure, Putin could lose some credibility, but as far as the overall Russian economy, who knows how much longer Putin is going to be in charge? The leadership may eventually change. Russia's status won't be dramatically diminished over the long run based on where it is now. But that's not the case for the United States. But I think what we are doing right now on the world stage when it comes to Russia is going to backfire and accelerate this process. And Biden right now is bragging about how much damage has been done to the Russian economy, to the Russian ruble, to the Russian stock market. Well, you know, when you live in a glass house or a glass White House, you shouldn't throw stones, because even more damage is going to be done to the U.S. economy, the U.S. stock market, the U.S. dollar, when the dollar loses its reserve currency status, which at the moment is hanging in the balance, and our own politicians, our own central bankers are clueless to the reality of this threat. And one of the primary reasons for all of the gloom were inflation expectations. The 1 year forward inflation expectations are now at 5.4%. This is the highest that's been since December of 1981. So much for Powell's claim that inflation expectations remain well anchored at 2%. Now, of course, consumers are right to expect more inflation, but they're wrong to expect it to only be 5.4%. It's actually going to be much higher than that. In fact, over the past 52 weeks, inflation has been 7.9% officially. Now, unofficially, it's close to twice that amount. So consumers are expecting inflation in the year ahead to be lower than the year behind. So they're still optimistic that the inflation problem is going to get better. I mean, they still believe the problem is going to be here, but they don't believe it's going to be as bad as what they've already experienced. Well, it's actually going to be worse. So if consumers are this gloomy based on the expectation that the inflation problem will get better, imagine how much gloomier they would be right now if they actually realized that this bad problem is about to get a lot worse. So I think there's a lot of room for this index to plunge further as reality rears its head and consumers realize what's in store for them, because they're still getting a lot of propaganda from the government and the media that the worst is behind us. And of course, all the inflation is simply a function of Russia and Putin. Whenever they talk about why prices are going up, they blame the pandemic. They blame Russia and Putin, or they blame the greedy corporations. In fact, Biden is specifically calling out the oil companies. The oil companies are responsible for rising oil prices because they're just not pumping enough oil. Obviously, if they could pump more oil at these higher prices, wouldn't they do it? I mean, don't they want to earn more money? Don't they want to sell as much expensive oil as they possibly can? The idea that they're just sitting on all this oil and not selling it is nonsense. One of the reasons that oil companies aren't pumping more oil is because of the hostility that the Biden administration has against the oil industry. People are afraid to invest in oil and gas. They're worried about more regulations. They're worried about more taxation. In fact, I can smell a windfall profit tax coming for the U.S. oil sector. And that's one of the reasons that I've invested more heavily in international stocks. I know the U.S. has a proclivity of doing that, right? As soon as the oil industry really starts to make money, they slap a windfall profit tax on them. Meanwhile, when oil is low, they don't get any relief for that. But the minute they start making some money, they get taxed. What kind of message does that send if you're telling these oil companies, hey, if you ever get to a situation where the oil price is really high, we're going to seize your profits because we're going to claim it's a windfall? Well, that discourages investment in exploration and development. Biden is bragging about the fact that he is cutting the deficit by $1 trillion. Well, he's only cutting it by $1 trillion in relation to the massive increase in the deficit that just happened during the prior year.